back at WN. It was another weird weekend and another week where we get closer to dealing Manny Machado and the end of the Showalter era, and we continue to talk about all of these things. And Luke, I know over the weekend the Chris Davis thing here has moved itself back into the forefront. I mean, it's I hate to be a complete jerk about this, and I'm going to be piling on the second that the Capitals season ends, which could be a minute and a half from now, of course. But, I'm going to pile on during June when I'm watching the World Cup with my Dear John Angelos and Dear Buck Showalter and Dear Adam Jones series as I revive my writing career next month. And I know you've been writing about Chris Davis at WNST.net this week, and it's whack-a-mole, literally, right? I mean, with the problems and the questions and the ownership and the team and the pitching and the bullpen and the lineup, and just every day there's something to talk about. Not much of it's good, bro.
Yeah, there's no way to sugarcoat it. I guess the one positive is the Orioles won their first road game since WrestleMania weekend, which, that was nice. But beyond that, you're talking about a team that's 4-19 away from Camden Yards. Hasn't been very good at Camden Yards either, just to be clear. But we're at this point now where the day-to-day, as far as wins and losses, don't mean anything from a standing standpoint. They're so far back in that regard. So you start looking. We've talked so much about Manny Machado. We've talked so much about Dan Duquette and ownership and Buck Showalter and what's going to happen there, and we still don't have clarity there. But the one individual you point to right now that at least from a financial standpoint, they're committed to for the next 4 seasons after this year is Chris Davis. And it's one thing to talk about a bad season like he had last year, or go back to 2016 and he had a really rough second half after a first half that was fine. And, I keep seeing some people refer to this as a slump, and really this has been going on for about 2 years. I went back over the weekend and looked at FanGraphs and went back to game logs, and I went all the way back to July 6th, 2016, right before the All-Star break. That covers 1,001 plate appearances. So we're talking approaching close to 2 full seasons. Chris Davis over that time, a 203 average, a 301 on-base percentage, and more than those numbers sound bad as it is, a 394 slugging percentage. This is a guy that, we're talking about a historic decline that he's in the midst of right now. And look, we all know the Orioles aren't going to release him right now. Ubaldo Jimenez should be a perfect example of why they're not even going to consider releasing Chris Davis anytime soon. But the simple fact that we're talking about this 2.5 years into this 7-year contract illustrates how disastrous this thing is. And I don't care how skeptical you were of it, and there were plenty of people that didn't like this deal at the time. Let's call a spade in that regard. But
including you and me, by the way.
Absolutely,
I have the tapes. Yes.
Well, at the same time, and I've said this to you before, we also said that, hey, they're making a major financial commitment to a player here, and it's not some $40 million contract. But that said, no one, absolutely no one, I don't care how smart you are from a statistical analysis standpoint, any of that, no one thought it was going to get this bad this quickly. And the Orioles are left in the midst of all their other issues that are more short to intermediate term problems. This long-term issue of Chris Davis, no matter how you slice it, whether it's he continues to be so bad that a year from now, whatever it is, potentially they start considering releasing him, whether it's he gets a little bit better but is still really bad, or if it's even just if you decide to cut him tomorrow, hypothetically speaking, you're on the hook for all that money over the coming years. This is such a colossal problem for them right now, and believe me, I'm not of the thought of mind to release him right now, especially this is a lost season anyway. You're not bringing anyone up that's going to turn this season around just to play instead of Chris Davis. But that said, the time to continue to just pencil him into the number 5 or number 6 spot and act like this is a slump and wait for him to just come out of it, they need to start being more aggressive about this.
They got to bat him 8th, right?
He shouldn't be hitting any higher than 8th or 9th when he does play. Now, he did sit on Sunday against left-hander Eduardo Rodriguez. We have seen him sit against a few more lefties. But here's the problem with that, Nestor. Yeah, he's hitting 139 against lefties. By no means am I saying he's been good against lefties whatsoever. But 3 of his 4 home runs have come against lefties. The problem is, yeah, okay, he's hitting 174 against righties. That's a little better in the batting average department. He's slugging 226 against right-handers. So I understand, in theory, people saying, well, maybe he should sit against lefties, but the little bit of power that he has shown this year has actually come against lefties. So I think...
Well, they only have lefties and righties. That's all they have.
Right. I mean, unless...
this isn't Monty Hall. There's no door number 3.
Yeah, the ambidextrous pitcher, Vendetti, maybe you bring him around to throw BP to him or something. I don't know, but...
Thank God I have a sense of humor at this point.
Yeah, but what are you doing to fix this? And look, behind the scenes, there's been a lot that's gone on the last couple of years with trying to... I don't think this has been a case where Chris Davis has... not listen to Scott Coolball or Howie Clark, their assistant hitting coach, or other people in the organization. I'm not accusing them of that whatsoever, but what I am going to accuse them of is you can't continue to just hit him in the middle of the order and think that this is going to get better, because it's not. It's just getting worse. I mean, it's one thing to talk about how much he's being paid and how he is not... I mean, we're so far gone beyond not living up to contract territory. Going into Sunday, Chris Davis had the 3rd worst OPS in baseball among qualified hitters. 3rd worst in the entire major leagues. The only ones worse, Cole Calhoun of the Angels, which is really surprising too, because he's kind of been a nice player for several years. I mean, not a superstar by any means. And the other is Lewis Brinson of the Marlins, who's a rookie. So that just kind of shows you what territory he's in. But I don't know if you need to give him the Tillman treatment and put him on the DL and send him to Sarasota. I don't know if you need to bring in a sports psychologist or a whole team of shrinks. I don't know if you need to hire some kind of hitting guru who thinks they can fix him. But you need to start becoming more aggressive in addressing how you're going to play this out. And part of that might include that he's not an everyday player until further notice. And believe me, they're not cutting him. That's completely unrealistic. They're not trading him. That's unrealistic at this point. I mean, it's so you can keep. They're not. He's not going to go to the minors. But at some point in time, you need to start attacking this with a little more. I don't know if extreme is the word or what, because this has gone on for a really long time now, and it's not showing any sign of getting better. And I go back to where he was a little bit earlier this month. He hit home runs in back-to-back games, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this is the start of him not becoming the guy he was in 2015 again, but at least being the guy he was last year, at least being the guy he was 2 years ago maybe, if you're lucky. But where he's been since then, I mean, striking out over half of his at-bats over the last 10 days, I mean, it's just been completely woeful. Since going back to May 10th, 4 for 32, 2 doubles, 17 strikeouts. And here's what's concerning, and this is where we start getting into looking beyond the raw, basic numbers that we all discuss pretty freely. No walks over that time, and we're seeing his walk rate drop. His average exit velocity is way lower and has declined, I think, 4 straight years now. He's just not hitting the ball hard. And the scary thing about this, everyone points to the strikeouts, and I get that. I mean, this is a guy who, even in 2013, I mean, he was striking out almost 200 times when he was the home run king. It's not as though his strikeout rate and contact rate have gotten so markedly worse this year. His strikeout rate's pretty on par with where it was last year. His contact rate's actually up very, very slightly. When he's hitting the ball, he's just not hitting the ball hard at all whatsoever, and that is indicative of declining bat speed. He's hitting a lot more ground balls. He's not hitting the ball in the air with any authority, and this is the profile of someone that you're starting to wonder if he's done.
Well, I mean, you're going through all the scouting part of this, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
you sound like a scout speaking to me, and the difference is 30 years ago when it was Dave Kingman or Gorman Thomas or the Never Wases, the Jim Fullers, right, and, the Earl Williams that came here and hit 40 home runs somewhere else and can't hit the ball out of the infield here. Look, we've seen this through every Sammy Sosa, through every Jim Thome, through every Eddie Murray coming back. Power doesn't age well, right?
No.
I mean, in Major League Baseball, after the age of 30, certainly over the course of time, other than a couple of steroid guys, and, Brady Anderson's running the company here, so he can tell you about hitting 50 home runs in a year and how that power declined relatively quickly as well. But, now we have statistical crazy, analytics and accuracy to this that really is going to be, moving forward, the reason none of these guys get these kind of contracts anymore. And it's going to allow every John Angelos moving forward to say, it's not collusion, it's analytics, right? Like, that's maybe not in the Orioles case because they don't employ analytics people, as we found out last week from the Boston Globe reporter who reported that they have 1.5 analytics people here, and other teams have 20. But baseball does analyze this, and I can only imagine what they're going through in the warehouse with Mr. A on the fail and all of this money out and this massive lawsuit and the stadium's empty and the team's falling down the mountain and they've got to deal Machado and Duquette doesn't want to come to work and Buck, all of this, and they're in 5th place or last place and you and I are piling on. I don't know where this is going the next 90 days, but certainly for those of us who watch this and for the Palmers and the Bordicks who have to opine on this on a night-by-night basis, watching Chris Davis come out and take 4 or 5 Ikes a night is painful, bro. Really, really painful.
It really is. And, this isn't a case of, it's one thing to watch someone like Mike Wright, who I still wonder what the end game is for him to continue to be on this roster, and I know he threw a couple scoreless innings on Sunday, even though he walked 3 batters in the process and didn't look particularly good doing it. But that's a case of someone who never panned out, never was, right? And even if he eventually goes somewhere else and becomes a decent reliever or whatever happens with him, guys like that are one thing. But in the case of Chris Davis, and to your point that you made a few moments ago, we know that power hitters, free-swinging power hitters, do not age well. And you can go, Ryan Howard's the example that so many people cite here recently, but what's happening with Chris Davis is so much dramatically worse. What Ryan Howard did his last few years is Babe Ruth compared to what we're seeing from Chris Davis in 2018. This is, you said it, it's painful. And lots of people poke fun at it, and look, I get that, and he needs to perform, and there's no question about that.
I go back to Glenn Davis, and literally being in those locker rooms where his trapezius was 1.5 inches, down. He had a physical problem. How much money and what it cost the organization, but boy, the bleeding of $130 million to the Angelos family. I might kill the old man. It's inconceivable that the franchise is going to shell out $130 million to this guy over the next 12 years. I don't know what they're going to do, but sending him out to hit the baseball, boy, that might not be the answer either. That's not getting him anywhere.
Right, and like I said, they're not going to cut him now. I don't think they even should cut him right now. But again, what do you do? This goes back to the lack of long-term vision for the organization. There needs to be a plan in place here to try to figure this out. And again, that's not to accuse them that they haven't tried things in the interim, and I know they have. I know Scott Coolball's worked with him extensively, and I think we're even seeing some of that from a standpoint of that. Like I said, his contact rate is actually up slightly from where it's been the last couple of years. But the problem is, we always talked about that contact to damage ratio. Buck Showalter loved to throw that term out there in describing Chris Davis and Mark Trumbo and so many of these beer league softball hitters that the Orioles have employed over the last 5 to 6 years with a lot of success in the process of doing that, to give them credit. But in this case, this is a guy who isn't making much more dramatic contact, and certainly, but the contact he's making is a shell of what he used to be, and it's alarming. You mentioned Glenn Davis. I've wondered aloud, and I know Buck Showalter was asked about Davis before Sunday's game in Boston, and he reiterated again he's healthy, but I've wondered, because this has been such a dramatic fall off the cliff for a guy over the matter of a couple years. and he's 32. He's not 38. I've wondered, is there some kind of chronic issue here? I don't know. I also think, the mental side of this, and we know that, he had the Adderall, he had the therapeutic use exemption, which, he's had since 2014, but we know what happened in 2014 and how that was such a bizarre, weird, bad, terrible season for him that ended in the suspension. We know that, I don't think Chris Davis, I don't think it's a case that he doesn't care. And I know a lot of fans want to throw that out there.
That's crazy.
Fans are frustrated. I think he cares. I think at this point he might care too much from a standpoint of what we're seeing. And I see a guy that I think a lot of his problems could be, it could be more mental than physical even. In addition to just the natural decline that a power hitter has when he starts hitting the wrong side of 30 and doesn't have that high contact rate and strikes out a lot. But this is just such a colossal mess. And again, the solution at this point cannot be that he continues to just hit in the number 5 or number 6 hole. If he's playing, and I'm not even going to endorse him playing every day at this point. But if he's playing, he shouldn't be hitting any higher than 8th in the lineup, and could very well be hitting 9th, and I wouldn't bat an eyelash about that. That's how bad this has been, but how do you fix it? It's just, is it able to be fixed? And to me, that's what they need to try to figure out between now and, I don't know, maybe the All-Star break next year. I don't know. And this again goes back to...
That's a lot of bad at-bats, dude. There's already been 1,000 of them, right?
I understood, but my point is, and this goes back to the long-term vision, long-term plan standpoint, this is a big enough investment, and this is franchise-altering money, and would be for all but about 3 or 4 teams in baseball. The Red Sox, they threw Pablo Sandoval over the ship. The Yankees can endure a bad contract like this. The Dodgers can endure a bad contract like this. But most teams can't, and there's going to be some significant fallout there. But my thought is, what are you doing to try to fix this? And if it involves benching him, if it involves doing a Tillman situation and send him to Sarasota, and you hire a hitting guru, you hire a sports psychologist, you hire a whole team of people, I don't know, but you need to... What you're trying now hasn't been working, and it hasn't been working for a long time now, and it's only getting worse.
So what you're saying is you got to try to fix him, which is what they've been trying to do, right?
And I don't know what the deadline is for that, because you do get to a point, and this goes back to what I said, he could just very well be finished, and that's that, and there's no fixing him. And if you come to that conclusion, you get to a point where something's a complete sunk cost, and you've already spent the money. The money's already going in his pocket, so you can either continue to trudge him out there and you're going to make your team even worse in the process by just having them on the field, or at some point you have that drop-dead date where you say, we failed, and this is over.
Well, you can only put him in the lineup if he's a Major League Baseball player, right? Yeah. Like that sure. Really should be the barometer of all of this, but we all know this is... this is a bat minor organization. This isn't normal. What happens here and what the orders are and whatever when we're paying the... I really don't know. We're in a new territory. I think I've seen everything here over a quarter of a century, we've seen it all except the championship. This is going to be a new way to handle this, to have this sort of a bust. I know how they handled it a generation ago. Albert Bell's hip fell off, and they called the insurance people, and Bob Ames covered their ass, and they got off the hook for $53 million of the $65 million or whatever that number was. Yeah. And I don't know that there's any of that going on here. I don't know that they bought psychological insurance for a $130 million first baseman, right?
Right. And I want to be clear. I don't know how to fix Chris Davis. I can look at all these numbers, and I can tell you things that I see statistically. And look, the Orioles, even with their limited analytics staff that they have, I'm sure they're well aware of all those things. But how you go about fixing this and how much time do you spend, what resources do you exhaust to try to get him, quote, fixed? What he did last year, look, he had a bad season last year, but there's a difference between having below average production but still having some production. And what he's a negative WAR player. He's a below replacement level player right now. And by a long shot. He has been one of the worst positional players in baseball this year. And I'm not saying that to be mean. The numbers support that. So what do you do to try to fix it? How long do you try to fix it? And if you come to the conclusion after you've exhausted every avenue and you've explored every possible solution, when do you make that decision to potentially cut bait? And again, I don't think that's happening anytime soon. But the way this is trending, even the Orioles, I'm not sure they're going to let him play 4 more years if he's going to continue to decline as rapidly as he has over the last 2 calendar years. I mean, it is flat out alarming, and I'm not exactly sure what you do about it, but I know you can't in any way justify continuing to put him in the number 5 or 6 spot in the order. You just can't continue to do that.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. We're monitoring the Ravens this week and obviously the Capitals and the NBA as we're getting down to the nitty-gritty on that. We watched some Boston people get excited about that over the weekend. But the Orioles are headed to Chicago. And, you know, you talk about not being pretty and the difference between last place and who's worse. These are the 2 dreg franchises, and we're going to play this out over 4 days of miserable bottom-fishing baseball. And certainly in Chicago, all the Hawks are going to be flying in on the Manny Machado story, right? Are you coming to the Cubs? Are you coming to the Cubs? And we burned 20 minutes on $130 million worth of literal waste in the lineup right now. And then there's Machado, who is playing out the string of, well, you know, what are we going to get back for him? And the Cubs appear to be one of the primary suitors in this thing. And the White Sox appear to be the primary suitor for who's going to get the number 1 overall pick next year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the American League right now, you have 3 teams that have been god-awful. Texas has been pretty darn bad, too. Let's throw the Rangers in there. But it's been the Orioles, Kansas City, and the White Sox. I mean, and at least the Royals still have the shine of a World Series ring from a few years ago that they can take some semblance of satisfactory from, even though the Royals, you know, these aren't your Royals of 2014 and 15 anymore. But you're right. I mean, Machado continues to play at such a high level. I mean, he's been an MVP caliber kind of player in the first half of the season. I mean, you look at Mookie Betts and you look at Mike Trout and you look at a few others that have played at a really high level, and Machado is right there. Now, it's been interesting. I've seen some things written as far as how he's actually had his defensive value hurt his overall value, and you know, from a metric standpoint, hasn't looked particularly favorable at shortstop, but you know, that's a discussion for his next team to hash out at this point. But in the case of Machado, I mean, there's certainly going to be Chicago reporters in that White Sox or in the White Sox stadium in the Orioles clubhouse talking to Machado in the same way that I saw a batch of Philadelphia reporters in the Orioles clubhouse last Wednesday asking him about the Phillies. And to Manny's credit, I think he's handled all that really well. And better than I thought he would, quite frankly. We haven't talked about this a whole lot, but I know Bryce Harper has basically cut off all questions about his pending free agency and his future and all that. And
well, he's probably not getting traded in July either, though, right?
Well, there's that, but at the same time, you know, he's been, you know, there have been times where I've even heard he's cut off interviews entirely when asked about his future. Manny's answered the questions. I think he's done it in a gracious, respectful way to both the Orioles and to his potential suitors, and I think that's smart on his part. You don't want to ruffle feathers with reporters that might be covering you on a daily basis come July or come next April. But I mean, this is kind of the tour that he's on now, and you know, every time he goes into a city that could be a potential suitor, or anytime a team that could be a potential suitor comes into Baltimore, you're seeing reporters in the Orioles clubhouse asking him, but you know, he continues to hit at a high level. You know, was 1 for 5 on Sunday, but certainly had a nice series up at Fenway. And you know, I mean, as much as you look at all the Orioles' problems, just about everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong this year. You know, the one silver lining has been not that Manny Machado is sticking around, because we know that ship sailed a long time ago, but that he is hit at a level that is maximizing the trade value that he has at this point. And that's a big if, and I don't necessarily have the confidence that the Orioles are going to execute it properly, but if they can do that, I think they can get some nice pieces that can help them for the future. But when they pull that trigger, how they're evaluating these players, are they getting ownership's approval for a deal? When are they getting that approval? When's it happening? how many teams are in on it? What's the urgency level for these teams? Do teams want them now where they can take advantage of having them longer, or are teams wanting to wait with the thought that the price for him will be a little bit less?
Is he a shortstop or a third baseman?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of layers to this, and that's why I've said all along, hypothetically speaking, you'd love to trade Manny Machado tomorrow from a hypothetical value standpoint. He'd be more valuable to a team than trading him a month and a half from now. But you need to have the teams that are prepared to make those moves and prepared to make their best offer, and you still have a lot of teams that are in evaluation mode right now as far as what they need and what they're willing to spend. And we all know Machado can put a team over the top, but that team needs to be confident that they're going to be in a position where that's going to matter. I mean, we were talking about the Dodgers 2 weeks ago, and you see how they played, and at this point, you wonder if they're even going to be in the race come late June or early July. It's hard to say, but.
How about those Braves? How about those Phillies? Right?
Yeah, really. Yeah. I mean, it is amazing. You look at some of these teams, and I'm guessing teams like that probably aren't going to be as inclined to go all in on a rental. But a team like the Cubs, a team like the Indians, those are some teams that are kind of established already, and that if they have a clear need, those are the types of teams I could see the Orioles. There being a match there. But again, who's making that call? Who's evaluating these prospects? When are you signing off on pulling the trigger on it? And
you better have more than one bidder. You better.
And I mean, naturally you want to have more than one bidder.
And once Rodriguez sticks the bats up their rectum at Fenway on a Sunday afternoon, you sort of know that they won't be dealing them to the Red Sox or the Yankees. Not that was ever really in question, but they're out. They're not considered, right? Unless you get a stalking horse or something. If you get on the phone, but I don't know that anybody in Boston or New York would take a conversation with an Angelos family member seriously in discussing Manny Machado. I just don't believe they would ever do that. So
I think they'd discuss it. I don't think the Orioles would do it. I think they would. I think both teams would discuss that in the right situation, considering what their needs are, where they are at any given point when those discussions take place. I don't think. I mean, there were reports that they discussed it this offseason. Now, I don't think it ever got anywhere remotely far.
Yeah, and the Orioles discussed signing Teixeira and all that. That was the story for 15 years. We talked to that guy. We offered him 10 cents. He got $1. That went on forever. I mean, I would believe that when I see it. And on the backside of the Rodriguez deal, I don't think there's any, and watching it over the weekend, it kind of gave me the queeves a little bit, too, to say, well, they won't be dealing anymore with them. They took them 25 years to pull off a deal, like literally, right?
Yeah, and again, I mean, I don't know how much I think it's just more so. I mean, we know how Peter Angelos has kind of treated dealing with the Yankees and the Red Sox, and they pulled off the deal in 2014. Which, look, I mean, I still look at that deal. Eduardo Rodriguez, would he help the Orioles? Sure, but Andrew Miller also helped pitch the Orioles into the ALCS that year. I mean, that's the cost of doing business sometimes. I mean, that's still, of all the deals they've made, that's way down on the list of ones where I really say, oh, wow, they really made a mistake.
He's kind of like a fourth starter, man. Like, he's not even as good as Channer Gonzalez in the end. He never turned out to be that good for me.
Right. So, I mean, I don't look at that deal as a big loss. I mean,
when he beats you on a Sunday and you see it up close and, you're going to Chicago talking about dealing with Machado, it's more attractive somehow to this organization to deal him to the Cubs than to let the Yankees or Red Sox run around with him for 8 weeks and invite him back,
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to wind up one of those places maybe anyway, kind of, sort of, right?
Right. And that's where I that line of thinking just drives me nuts from a standpoint of if they offer if they make the best offer. And look, if you want to use that as the tiebreaker, let's say the Cubs and the Yankees, hypothetically, and again, do I think that's going to happen? No. But let's say those two teams offer you deals that are of equal value in your assessment. If you want to use that as the tiebreaker, that you'd rather deal them to the National League and the Cubs, and maybe you think that improves the Cubs' chances of signing them long term then in the offseason, I'm cool with that. I'm by no means am I saying that you should be calling the Yankees and the Red Sox first in any type of trade you try to make. But that said, that the fact that they're in your division, that should not hinder you from making the best possible deal with either of those teams. if that opportunity presents itself. And so, I mean, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, it's amazing because I feel we've been talking in this context for such a long time already.
I'm worn out. I mean, every time the text goes off, I'm thinking, is it finally there? You know, it's kind of like every time I drive it into D.C. and the traffic all stops and the cops go by, I'm thinking, maybe this is the minute it actually happens and we get freedom back. But I digress. But, I mean, literally, at some point, that WNST text is going to go off from Coons Ford, and Manny Machado is going to be dealt to City X. I can't wait for that to happen. I mean, literally. And then we'll begin the dissection of who actually made the deal. And who the kids are that they're bringing in that we've never heard of. Because we're looking at Moncada this week, right? Like, you look at the Chris Sale deal and say, well, what did the White Sox get out of that, right? And they got last place, or fifth place, as they call it on Massive.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, as much as, and look, it's very clear the Orioles are in a rebuild kind of a position right now, but that's why I've kind of asked the question, to what degree are they going to do it? To me, trading Manny Machado and Zach Britton, assuming he gets back quickly enough, and looks like there should be a good chance for him to get back and pitch long enough to establish some value, if all goes well. I mean, he looks like he could be back 2 weeks from now, 2.5, 3 weeks from now, if all goes well. Looks like he's going to start a rehab assignment at some point in the next 10 days to 2 weeks potentially. So to talk about those guys, to talk about Brad Brock, Adam Jones, whatever you want to decide there, and as I've said, that's a little bit more of a delicate situation. I think everyone should acknowledge that. But those decisions, to me, should be pretty clear-cut what you try to do, and Jones being kind of the exception there that's a little more complicated. To me, the real questions at this point for this organization, if they had a clear vision and long-term stability in their front office, which we know they don't, but if they did, the real questions would be, what are you doing with Jonathan Scope? What are you doing with Kevin Gausman, who's going to be a free agent the year after Scope? What are you even going to do with Dylan Bundy, who by 2021, are you in a position where you're ready to win at that point? I mean, you have these are three valuable assets that you could potentially deal and really kickstart a rebuilding effort. Or are you going to deal Machado? Maybe you deal Zach Britton. Maybe you'll decide to hold on to Adam Jones on a 2 or 3 year deal, which I'm not completely opposed to that notion at the right price, if Adam wants to come back, which I think is a big question. But, do you kind of piecemeal it a little bit and just make a couple moves and then say, well, we still have all these guys and we're going to we're going to make some moves, and, we've cleared off some payroll with Machado and a couple other guys being gone. And to me, then you're into that 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, and we saw it all the way up until Andy McPhail, where, what was it? It was the race for 82 wins. And that's just such a bad model to be in no man's land, where you're hoping that if everything breaks perfectly, maybe you have a prayer at being a wild card contender. Or do they decide to be a little bit more bold and not just deal the guys that are expiring contracts this year, but you deal Jonathan Scope because he balks at signing a long-term deal, if that's in fact what would happen. And you decide that you're going to deal Kevin Gausman because he's had a pretty good year, and some teams really value the fact that they'd have 2 more years of control with him. That's where you could get back some really good prospects and really start to kickstart this thing. Now, it would mean you'd really stink even more so in the next year or two, but it might lessen the cloud cover a little bit for 2020, 2021, 2022. Or are you going to try to just be mediocre, and then those guys will all leave by the time that maybe you have developed some decent young players? So this is such a critical juncture for this organization, and that's why I continue to go back to lame duck GM, manager not under contract. Brady Anderson, is he going to be running the place or not? Who knows right now for sure.
And a track record of 25 years of bad ownership. Yeah, and a track record of not getting this right. We talk so much about the Ravens, and in the end, they surprise us on draft night, and Ozzie might know what he's doing still after all these years, huh?
Well,
right?
we'll see, and that's another discussion that we'll continue to get onto. And look, I don't think the Ravens' track record has been something to celebrate the last 5 years, but the track record for 20 years is something to celebrate a ton. And to your point, it speaks for itself. But getting back to the Orioles,
this is why I'm writing John Angelos letters, because somebody's going to have to step up and run the place better than it's been run by a lot.
And that's what I said. I mean, to me, there's no intellect involved in trading Manny Machado at this point. You have to do it. The only intellect is trying to gauge the market at when the perfect time is going to come as far as when you're going to get the best possible deal. Not the miracle deal that they're probably still hoping for that's not going to come to fruition, but the best possible deal that they can get now. When I say now, at some point between now and the trade deadline, what's the best possible deal you can get? That's the only intellectual challenge.
Well, then the other part is you hope he don't turn his ankle, right?
Well,
that happens.
There's always going to be that.
Well, right, but that's part of what happened with Britain, quite frankly. He's goofing around.
Yeah, no question about that. I mean, there's no question. But to me, there's so many more questions that this runs so much deeper as far as what do you do with guys. To me, Jonathan Scope, and look, Scope's not having a great year, and maybe this is the time maybe when you strike, and maybe you get him where he feels a little more vulnerable, and he's been hurt earlier this year, and maybe this is the time if you feel you want to sign him long term. Now's the time to make your last best offer to try to get it done. And if he balks because he says, "Well, I'll be hitting free agency next fall, a year from this fall," then trade him, because you cannot repeat this Manny Machado scenario again. I mean, you just can't. And I know Scope's not near the overall player that Machado is, but again, you're talking about a player in his mid-20s, a guy who still has a lot of good baseball ahead of him. So those are the decisions they should be looking at right now, and they're just kind of plugging along, right? I mean, we've used this analogy of them inching closer and closer to that proverbial cliff over the last couple years, and I think I said this to you probably about a month ago. I said, it's almost like right now they've got to the point where the bridge is out and they just plowed right through the sign that says the bridge is out, and they're still moving
it's Smokey and the Bandit. The car's up in the air and it's doing flips. It's like a James Bond movie or something.
Right. But instead of discussing guys like Scope and what you could potentially do with Gausman, and even just talking about Bundy, and look, I'm not saying absolutely trade all three of those guys. I'm just saying those are guys, if you're talking about entering a rebuilding process, those are three guys that could actually bring you back some real stuff. They're not going to get much for Brad Brock, even if Brad Brock straightens himself out over the next 2 months. They're going to get
they'll be lucky to get an agreement from Adam Jones and another team willing to pay him $5 million to rent him for 8 weeks.
The only one out of these four guys that's going to bring them anything of note is Machado. Maybe if Zach Britton comes back and is dominant for a month, maybe you get something decent for him. You're not going to get much for Adam Jones. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging to Adam Jones, but as you pointed out, he's not exactly the cheapest rental in the world, and he's not putting up big numbers. I mean, he's been decent of late, but he's got a .284 on-base percentage. I mean, he has an OPS that's barely over 700. I mean, he's been
he's just
a
guy.
Average center fielder.
He's just a guy. Yeah, he's a guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. I mean, and he means a lot to the Orioles. I'm not sure he means as much to other teams right now, at least in a context of you're going to get something really meaningful in return for him. So that's why I kind of say, okay, trading Machado is the no-brainer part of it as far as deciding to do it, but you have some other assets that could really fetch you some good returns, and I don't expect them to trade any of those guys, but those are the discussions. If you had a stable general manager right now and you had a clear long-term vision as far as what you wanted to do, those would be the discussions going on right now, much more so than, are we going to trade Adam Jones? Are we going to trade Brad Brock? Or do we think someone would take Darren O'Day off our hands? Those three guys that I mentioned that are here beyond this season, those are three guys that you could at least consider to move and really get some good pieces back in return. I mean, but I don't expect that to happen, just to be clear, but that's what I would be talking about if I were in a position of power and looking at a rebuilding process for this team at this point.
He is Luke at WNST.net and Baltimore Luke on Twitter. I'm sure we will pick this conversation up in progress day by day as the Orioles go out and continue to play out the string for the next 100 games or thereabout, beginning in Chicago this week on the south side of town. And as the schedule goes, Tampa this weekend, Washington, and then the New York Yankees come here to town next week. Speaking of New York, Belmont Bus looking to do that on the 9th of June. If you have any interest in seeing Justify and Bob Baffert try to win a Triple Crown and do something cool, toss me an email, nasty@WNST.net. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.